A lot of people can find copper in wires and go to scrap heaps and get this stuff and get really stronger soils going. And the interesting thing is it really attracts more life. I've noticed more animals and birds and other life coming to my property. The fact that it cleaned up the sky was really exciting for me, because I've always been very confused about how the geoengineering works with free will, because it seems I haven't consented. I do very similar to what you do, Crow. I declare, every day. I cancel clear contracts I may have inadvertently accepted. I say I invite God to be through me, to work through me. That it's not my will, it's the bigger will. These sorts of things. But this one bothered me because I don't consent to this, and this is affecting me directly. And this is very empowering to know that we can simply put these antennae out on our land.
So I want to ask questions before you keep going. So I go to the hardware store and let's just say I get like what would be a broom handle, all right, a piece of wood like a broom handle, and I get some copper wire. Is it being coiled either clockwise or counterclockwise? Does it matter how many coils there are? Does it matter the gauge of the wire? Does it matter how deep you set it in the ground or how much is above the ground?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the more of the metal that you have, or the more concentrated, then the more you're attracting, the more that's going to happen. You also want to be aware that you can overwhelm plant systems by doing it too much. Ideally, Ken Wheeler is really into this stuff, and he talks about trying to space your coils more so evenly, trying to get them the coiling down to the root level of whatever you're growing as much as possible.
Do the coils touch each other, or does the copper wire touch, or is it spaced?
It's supposed either or. You can do it spaced, or some people will run under the ground and connect another line of copper, and they are directing it towards the magnetic north, which is the center, which is our center, right, on the flat plane. And that is, so there's all these alignments that are discussed. Now, in the electroculture world, if they think that we live on a ball earth, there's going to be some mistakes, but in some ways in the explanation. But ultimately, some people say, oh, coil left and coil right, and because of the poles, and this sort of thing, but they're thinking ball earth. But I've done both, and I find success with both. I was going to do an experiment to see if counterclockwise was more so for clearing the air and clockwise was more for the soil, but I haven't seen a difference.
I can add a little bit of knowledge there. Actually, Fortune and I don't know, months ago, had a conversation about this. It matters. And the reason I knew it matters is way back decades ago when I was first studying Tibetan Buddhism, they would get these shells that they did things with, like make horns and other things. Yeah. And they would always distinguish whether it turned to the left or the right. So I knew the spiral mattered. Then I found myself in the Southwest looking at petroglyphs, and I recognized that the spirals would go one way or the other. Here's what I've determined from people who know quite a bit. In meditation and other methods, people might consider that when I consider counterclockwise movement about my body, it's disconnecting. When I consider clockwise motion about my body, it's connecting. And that's only one small aspect of what it could mean, but if that helps at all. So what I'm hearing is, say I'm not doing this, say I'm interested in just the chemtrails for right now. Mm-hmm. I mean, anyone can look up how to help your tomato plants and other things, and you're going to explain that. But if I just wanted to deal with chemtrails, I get a broomstick, I get a relatively heavy gauge copper wire, and I go clockwise all the way up. Then I bury it in the ground. Let's say I do it a foot, and then I put it out there. It's your contention that this will help to dissipate the kind of milky ugliness of the sky after a heavy chemtrail run.
Yes, as I've been witnessing it, I've never had such a normal looking sky since I've done this. And the whole time I've lived here, and the whole time I lived at the other house as well. And they're still spraying. It's still happening. It's just, it's harder for to stay. Now, I was trying to think, what is happening to the ether? Is it because there's a relationship between the ground and the sky? Is it because it's grounding the the dielectric into that space and that creating a magnetic field? Is that rising? So what happens to the magnetic field, basically? And how is that impacting what's above it? I haven't gone all the way into the science of it like I did with the vinegar. The vinegar, I dove deep and I was like, what could be happening that this is actually
We're going to have to cover that. So don't forget that, because I've been doing it and I did it. It freaking works.
It works. Yeah.
It works.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll explain that in a bit, how it works. Cause I knew there had to be, this is chemistry. That particular one is chemistry. Chemistry is something I'm good at. I knew I could figure that out and I did. But this stuff is in more Ken Wheeler's wheelhouse. I don't completely understand the interplay between these fields, but it's clearly making fields.
Do other people put these in the ground and recognize that it's dissipating the milky chemtrail? Okay, so I'm in. I'm going to do it. I'll report back.
Cool.
And let's do the vinegar. So here's what happened recently. David Weiss called me and he said, "You're the only person I know to call. I'm going to ask you this crazy question about vinegar and I'm going to ask you if it works." I said, "You don't need to tell me yes, it works. I know it works." And he goes, "How do you even know what I'm talking about?" I said, "Because I had to do this in San Diego just so I could use my telescope. It had gotten so bad." Basically, you take, and it's cheap, you take a gallon of distilled white vinegar outside. If you have a barbecue or a barbecue with a hot plate, you boil it. And within an hour, you will begin to see that the blue skies are coming back. Within 2 or 3 hours, my experience here the other day, the last time I did it, was as far as I could see was blue skies, and they were spraying us like bugs. It's my contention that you're starting a chain reaction. But what you explained to us, why, and it's almost unbelievable. The first time I did it, I saw it work, and I thought, this is just a fluke. There's no way in hell my little stupid boiling pot of vinegar here is clearing miles and miles of sky above my head. But it does, to the point where if 1,000 people in this state, my little state of Rhode Island, did it, you would have blue skies everywhere. So how does it work? What's your idea on why boiling vinegar clears our skies back to blue?
Yeah. And, this was back in May of 2022 when I noticed it was working. And again, the correlations kept adding up. I did the boiling method. I did the just laying out method in a black turkey pan with cleaning vinegar, so it was a little more concentrated. I did the method with the humidifier method, especially when it started to get cold, because see, there's a limitation to it for people who live in the great white north. White meaning we get a lot of snow. You can't really run this very well in the winter because you need the heat for the evaporation in order for the oxidation of OH, so oxygen, hydrogen, moiety, those free radicals, by hydrogen ions. And so this is acetic acid. There's actually a few acids in there, but acetic acid and formic acid seem to be the two bigger players in it, because of the way that they give off these hydrogen ions through this evaporation process. So there's an acid-base chain reaction effect that occurs by this evaporation, which can just show you how subtle local hydrogen ionic changes actually can affect water, as it's affecting the waters. And waters are conscious as well. So then we haven't even gone there, but with the research, but then you have conscious water and sharing of water information. There's that whole thing. But I found that if you were to have enough, and it doesn't even have to take a lot, but enough of this hydrogen ionic change coming up into the air, it causes a reaction with the OH radicals and whatever they've sprayed. So whatever that's, but it's
a chain reaction. Is that
right?
Correct?
Right. So what happens is it begins like a chain reaction where it just creates essentially water. And if it's a lot, if there's a lot of water in the air, it'll make it rain. And I've noticed that too. I put the vinegar out, within half an hour, it's raining. So it'll make in H2O from it. and it's gone, then it dissipates. Or if it's hot enough, it'll just go into steam and it'll just vaporize, it'll evaporate literally in front of your eyes. And that's the thing that makes the most logical sense to me from a chemistry perspective. And also, then I started thinking, why do they hate hydrogen technology so much when it's a free energy option for us? We can have cars and other vehicles running on hydrogen and running on water, basically. We already have this tech. Why are they hate it so much? That could have been unearthed long ago. And I'm sure it's been tried and then and smothered. And I think it's because their geoengineering programs would be finished because everyone's driving and putting off hydrogen ions everywhere,
That's an idea. So let's make a big deal out of this. I was waiting. I didn't really realize we were going to go down this road, but this is no joke. Just simply boiling a gallon of vinegar in your backyard. And by the way, so like 3 or 4 weeks ago, they started spraying at a level that I haven't seen in forever. And David Weiss reminded me of a thing I'd forgotten about. And I immediately that day went out and I got my, it wasn't even really warm enough to be thinking about the barbecue yet, but I got briquettes, I got everything, my heavy pot, I did it. And once again, re-amazed. I knew what was coming, but I was re-amazed. And over the course of 3 hours, I burned through more than a gallon of vinegar. I kept it going for 5. I think I went through more than 2 gallons of vinegar. I think part of it is you let it sit even after you're done boiling. You let it sit when there's like an inch left in the bottom. But from north to south, as far as I could see the edge of where the sky was still milky. But, I was guessing how many miles is that? Still blown away that my little tiny gallon pot had created a chain reaction. This is real. And people can do this. I urge them to do it and film it. But you mentioned 2 other methods. Are there methods to be used when the conditions aren't, if I can't boil? You mentioned a turkey pan and you mentioned a humidifier. How does that work?
Well, I knew that we needed evaporation. I was playing around with different methods of evaporation to test what would be more effective, what would take longer. And I was just experimenting. So using the black colored pan and putting it out in the sun, I was getting lots of evaporation. And I found that method worked just fine on the regular spray days when they weren't going like really, really heavy. But then there'd be like special days where they were after it, they were going really deep and hard. And I think almost it's making them try to do it harder because they're like, what's happening? Why isn't this sticking? Right. So they're like, more. And that's when I bought the vaporizer to put out, because then that's going right into it's going right into the vapor itself, right? In its heated air. And the idea was to see if that worked better or not. I didn't find it necessarily better, but it was an option for those days where there was no sunlight to evaporate my vinegar. And so that's when I decided how I would choose which method. Your method is actually outside, you've got heat on it, you're boiling it up. And that method would have to happen for those really super heavy spray days where a little bit of vinegar evaporation isn't going to cut it.
So it did. They were spraying from north to south, nonstop, line after line, couldn't see the sun. Within an hour, there was blue. Within 3 hours, like I described, it's unbelievable. And I started, I remember back in San Diego, I don't even know why. I guess I do, because I knew I had to get out of San Diego and I had to come here and do what I had to do. But I was thinking, if someone got like a helium balloon and, messed with whether, get vinegar up there and then expel it and film it, so it was concentrated vinegar at altitude, you'd have to be able to see that chain reaction, don't you think? Or if someone had a drone or something and they, got up, I don't know, 500 or 1,000 feet and they misted it somehow, I'm guessing you would see a dramatic chain effect occur if it was all at once like that, don't you think?
You would just need to do a hydrogen fill. Just go right for the hydrogen. Don't even worry about the vinegar at that point. You go for fill a balloon full of hydrogen and pop it up there and see what happens.
And film. Yeah, it's amazing. Because I actually went to film. I don't have my time lapse. Like in San Diego, I had a thing where it would have been easier for me to time lapse. But if I would have done it the other day, it would have been astonishing. And by the way, Dave was doing it in Connecticut, and he did what I did. The first time he did it, he's like, I can't believe it. This worked, but it's got to be a fluke, right? So that's why he called me. I said, no, this is real. And what we're talking about, like, I'm going to do the copper thing you explained. Absolutely. I'm going to do it big, and I'm going to do it in the four corners of my yard. I'm going to use big gauge things. I'm going to coil clockwise. I think I'll have to think about that. And I'm going to leave a tail of the copper above the wooden thing that I sink into the ground. Yeah. And I'm going to see, because they are literally, the spraying has picked up. You can always tell there's something coming when you see the spraying go to the levels that it's at now. And by the way, if you go to the forum, you'll see that it's in a lot of places. In Canada, did you guys notice a pickup in the chemtrailing over the last, say, 3 weeks?
Well, for me here, it's been normal. So no, because I have the copperhead. It's just actually, it's so nice to see fluffy clouds again. I don't remember last time I saw like actual pretty fluffy clouds. And if I go driving around, it's usually milky. It's that milkiness. Yeah. Even if you had that nice round cloud, right? The fluffy cloud, there would always be like a background milky haze. This gets rid of the haze. The haze is no longer. So you can still have your clouds, your normal clouds and sort of thing, but that disgusting, weird milk is gone. And they try to spray, but it just always, like you said, it's always, you can see it on the outskirts. So if I look around my property, I'm like, yep, they're milky over there. I can see that they're milky over there, but they're not milky here, And there's going to be times where it will overwhelm you. It's not going to be 100% effective if they're they're adamant that they're going to have this.
I did it with vinegar, and they were freaking as adamant as I have ever seen, and I kicked their ass. I'm just saying, I kicked their ass that day. So do you think that taking a nice big, inch in diameter wooden, like a broom handle or shovel handle, wrapping it and putting it in the four corners, do you think that will give me a result?
Yeah, that's a good start. You're going to know your levels. You're going to see what happens with that amount. And then you might go, okay, let's see if I double it, what happens? Like, you'll have to play around with it. And interestingly, I didn't even think about coiling direction when I started. I just started doing it counterclockwise. I didn't mean to, it just did. So I'm pretty sure all of mine right now are counterclockwise, just by sheer, that was the way my hand was doing it, right? So I'll experiment.
Might be best. That's a disconnect, right? So as I started to say clockwise in my mind, I'm like, wait a minute, I don't want to connect to that. I want to disconnect from that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I did them all counterclockwise.
Because what we know now, I mean, with the tide turning and so many people, have had it up to their eyeballs with all this. What I noticed the day that I kicked their butts was when I stopped that evening, they poured it on, I think, to try to make up ground. In the middle of what I was doing, they stopped. So they've been going for days. I basically kicked their butt with 2 gallons of white vinegar. They stopped in the middle of that. And then after, as it was getting dark, they started picking up again. And I remember commiserating, man, if I could get even a few hundred. So with regard to the geoengineering, it goes to show how simple the solutions are. And, all this time of feeling, what's even more ridiculous, I knew this. I was doing this in San Diego and I had completely forgotten about it, partially because they haven't been spraying us so hard for a long time here. And it was interesting that I got a call right as it started to heat back up. But if enough people did this, and I am absolutely going to counterclockwise try this on the four corners of my little yard and see what happens. Is there anything else you want to add about geoengineering? Because I'm going to kick it over to Jason. I'm sure he wants to catch up.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions I was having in my head when I was doing this is, what are they spraying on each individual day? We don't know, right? There are differences perhaps in their solutions of when they're attempting certain weather phenomenon. Maybe one is more barium and aluminum heavy, or maybe another one they're using strontium or something else. And the question I had was, will this work for all of the varying sprays that they're attempting? And then also, how does it affect not just the spraying, but the energy that they pour into creating the storms with HARP and NextRad stations and these sorts of energy fields? When you can see the sky looking like the sand under the water at the shoreline, right? All wavy like that. That's not normal. That's done electrically with their tools. And so now how does that, how do what we're doing here, how does that affect all of these aspects? So these are other questions that we need to explore.
So here's the thing, and I guess I'll wrap it. We put down good information, and I urge people, if you do this, film it, comment, tell us what you learn. We all wish we knew more, and we're you can feel it, right? Everyone can feel that we're kind of like at that pivot point where the world is trying to lock the handcuffs, and yet the consciousness is blowing open. So many things that were accepted for so long are becoming unacceptable. But I'll say this. Another thing I do each day is I give thanks for the sunlight, which guarantees life in our creation, which provides everything we've ever needed, by the way. But in the thanking, I thank it because it gives everything freely. We don't get charged. Everything that is given in the natural system proves that we were made beneficiaries of this creation, which I always, give thanks for. There is no cost. And so I don't submit or opt in to what they're doing up there, and they're infringing on my God-given rights. They're blocking the sunlight, which I have been granted. And I think it's a crucial point. But Jason, it's all you. I didn't leave many cracks in hour one.
Well, it'd be a shame if tens of thousands of people started doing the old vinegar trick, wouldn't it?
It'd be interesting for sure, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Can you see him trying to legislate no vinegar laws? or the price of vinegar for a gallon goes from $2 to 20?
Yeah, someone said, "Oh, now you just wrecked the copper price saying that." Well. Again, it can be used with other metals. Don't worry, guys.
And is that because it's acting as an antenna?
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be copper, but...
No, but if you're doing it as electroculture, they make copper tools for gardening as well, because just the usage of the copper in the soil helps the soil, never mind the whole antenna aspect. So the copper itself has a soil benefit, period, and might as well get more out of what you're doing.
What are the special properties of copper that it has these benefits? Do we know?
Well, other than I know it as a something that we need to take elementally for health, it balances zinc in the body. It balances out other metals, right? And it's also electrochemically sensitive or electromagnetically sensitive. So it's part of the magnetic field aspect. So but yeah, great question.
It has to do with blue blood too, right? Copper has to do with the blue blood idea.
Yeah, and somehow insects don't seem to like it. So reptilians and insects, I don't know what's going on there with their copper, but yeah, but it does seem